Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And saving the A's is going much better over the last 5 or 6 weeks of this 2039 season after a very average start, the definition of average, with a 28-28 record as of June 1st. The team has been playing some great baseball over the past 6 weeks or so. We've closed the gap on the Texas Rangers in the AL West to just 3.5 games, and we are 4 games up on the final wild card spot in the American League as we attempt to win back-to-back championships for the first time with this A's franchise. Couple of relatively quick announcements before we get moving on with this episode, which will be focused on the first-year player draft. One, as I noted about a week ago, the episodes are going to be a bit sporadic over the next few weeks. Incredibly busy with work these days. Just a heads up that the first week in December probably will be relatively few episodes, unfortunately. Hope is maybe things will get a bit better after that in terms of my ability to keep putting on episodes. But definitely appreciate the loyalty of our viewers, and we're going to keep this series going. If I ever disappear without a trace, it means I am incapacitated or trapped under a large object, because as those of you who have followed my series over the years know, I like to wrap things up with some semblance of a bow, regardless how the series have gone, and certainly intend to do that with this A's series. But hopefully we still have many seasons to come before we perhaps turn our attention to OOTP 26. On that front, just also wanted to react to the announcement that Marcus, the creator of and brains behind the OOTP series over the past half or quarter decade, is going to be leaving the company. I believe that came out yesterday, I believe Friday, as I am working on this episode on Saturday afternoon. Definitely surprising. Certainly wonder what it means for the future of the franchise. I think the game is in great hands, and Marcus over the years has, I believe, kind of indicated that a lot of the people that have joined the team have better programming and development skills than he has at this point, but certainly the man who has been the mastermind of this series that has given many of us hundreds, if not thousands of hours of fun and entertainment and strategy over the past decades, will be moving on from OOTP. Definitely does cause a little bit of concern as to what the game may look like in the future, particularly for those of us like myself who are more focused on the historic base game than some of the new additions to the OOTP world. Can't say that I've been with OOTP since the start. As I was thinking back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I definitely was playing a game similar to this, but it was the Baseball Mogul series. I don't know if that is still around. Would have loved to have something of like this back in that time frame, because I do think that OOTP, in my opinion, is a stronger series than Baseball Mogul was. But for whatever reason, I knew about Baseball Mogul rather than OOTP, so I can't say I've been with Marcus and team since the start. But I've been on this journey for many years now with OOTP, and certainly looking forward to 26 and seeing how the team performs without their guiding light of Marcus Heinsohn still being involved. And the last quick point I wanted to make was just a belated happy Thanksgiving to anyone else here in the United States. I hope you were able to enjoy some time with family, friends, food, football, whatever else you enjoy on Thanksgiving. And with that, it is time to turn our attention to the Major League Draft, or the first year player draft for Major League Baseball, more accurately. As we touched upon in the previous episode, we weren't necessarily incredibly impressed with this class of prospects. And I think the broad view from the Worldwide Scouting Department, which has once again come through for us with a lot of good suggestions, is similar. Not necessarily the greatest draft in the world, and the fact that we are picking with the final pick in the first round, 36th overall, after having the best record in baseball and winning the championship last season, means that we get a actual option to draft 35 fewer players than the team that picked first. So there's a fair amount of talent that we just haven't looked at that's already off the board. And as I noted, the Worldwide Scouting Department was not particularly in love with this year's draft in general. There are a couple of favorite players when all is said and done, but I don't think the opinions were generally as strong as they have been in previous seasons. Those of you who don't love my fascination with young pitchers will be happy to know that Ben Skaggs, Joey Gaskins, and Juan Ramos, who we talked about in last episode as the top 3 pitchers on the board, are not seriously under consideration for me to pick with the first round pick this year. The general perception of everyone who opined was that hitters were the way to go. Both Dodo Dude and Avery Shayam outlined that a focus on offense was probably the way to go in this draft, and I can't disagree with that. So we'll visit the 5 players now who members of the Worldwide Scouting Department recommended. First was the center fielder Dave Moser. Paul West thought that Moser might be the way to go. Pretty interesting bat, potentially excellent contact hitter with an outstanding eye. Not a ton of home run power, not all that much speed, and not great defensively, but still could be a pretty interesting player. So he is certainly in the mix under consideration. Another player who had one scout strongly supporting him was the third baseman Chad Allred, supported by Coach 1549. Allred, third baseman with a traditional third baseman's profile, a lot of home run power, and an arm that's his best trait as a defender. Incidentally, when we look at some of these defensive ratings for young players, it does seem to me, and again, this is completely anecdotal, but it does seem to me that here in OOTP 25, the typical ratings for draft-eligible players or international amateur free agent players is generally lower than it was in the past. Could be completely wrong on that. Could be just weird luck and what's going on in my game, but my hypothesis is that with the development lab in the game this year and some of the programs that improve defense being so strong and so effective, that perhaps they've had to, in recent draft classes, be nerfing the defensive ratings a bit, assuming that a lot of the top prospects will end up getting multiple trips through the development lab to work on their defense over the years. Could be completely wrong about that. Would love to know what you've experienced in the games that you've been playing. But that's kind of why I'm thinking that it often seems like there's just not a lot of good defensive players around to consider. Allred looks like a competent third baseman at this point, but certainly would hope that if we drafted him, he ended up more than competent defensively when all was said and done. Second baseman John West was recommended by Avery Shayam, and he was also the third choice of Peter Hooper, another guy with Defensive issues, absolutely brutal range of 35 for an infielder at this point. Not a ton of speed, but a very well-balanced bat and potentially an excellent contact hitter. And he also brings that durability as well. So West, another player under consideration. And then the final two players are the ones who got the most support. DeAnthony Bramblett, one of the highest ceiling players in the draft, recommended by QuiTime, Jarek Braxton, Coach 1549, and he was Peter Hooper's second choice. Rebel Bramblett, a 18-year-old second baseman, another guy who doesn't look particularly good defensively quite yet. Really good bunter, has decent speed, and a bat that if he reaches his full development, and certainly that high work ethic will encourage him to hopefully do that, could be average to above average in every offensive category. But the most popular player among the worldwide scouting department was a guy that stood out to me a little bit when we went through this last time, and that's the center fielder Jeremy Wright. Scott Donovan, Paul West, QuiTime, Peter Hooper, Coach 1549 all had Wright at the top of their list. Avery Shayam ranked him second behind West, as we talked about earlier. Potentially really good contact, above average home run power, and borderline outstanding gap power to go with really good speed. Not a guy who's going to draw a ton of walks. Is going to be looking to get paid down the line. But he is a guy who is already a pretty accomplished outfielder for a 18-year-old in terms of his range and his error ratings, with some improvement in the development lab from Mr. Wright. It's not inconceivable to think he could be a Gold Glove caliber outfielder, possibly even a Gold Glove caliber center fielder, and with a bat that we think could be pretty good. Wright is certainly interesting as well. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm not in love with anyone in this draft, similar to many of you who have opined. But I think I am leaning towards going with the center fielder Jeremy Wright. He was the guy I was leaning towards at the end of last episode. I've done a fair amount of review of other players and review of all of the players that we've talked about, plus a lot of other players offline. Not in love with anybody, but I think Wright is a potentially interesting combination of really good speed, really good defense, and a bat that could be really good as well. We are strong in the outfield in the organization, but with a high school player who's likely 5, 6, 7 years away, not going to necessarily let needs in what the system looks like today be a big driver of what we do in the draft. Bramblett was the second most popular player, and as we noted last episode, he's projected, at least in the mock draft, to go with us with our second round pick, the compensatory pick that we got for the departure of longtime ace Jackson Ferris. I think it's a coin flip whether or not Bramblett is around at that point. As much as I do like him, I think I like Wright just a little better, largely driven by the better defense. And there is, in theory, some chance that Mr. Bramblett will be around when we go to pick in the end of the second round. Could certainly say the same thing about Mr. Wright, but he is expected to go with a supplemental first round pick. So at least according to the predictions of the media and others who opine on these things, it would seem much more likely that Bramblett's around for us with one of our second round picks than Wright will be. Scouting director, as we noted in the last episode, also recommends Jeremy Wright. So we are going to go ahead and draft him, meet his demand, and find out who is available for us in the second round. And rather than any suspense, we can see Allred, Bramblett, Moser, West. Obviously, the four guys that we talked about are all still available. And the nice thing about OOTP and other games similar to it is that we don't have to wait hours, or in the cases of some drafts in other sports, possibly even a day or two until our next pick to find out if our secondary options are still on the board. All we need to do is click a button and find out. And interestingly, here with our 2 picks in a row at the end of the second round, Bramblett and Allred and West are all still available. Moser, recommended by Paul West, is the only of the players who are off the board at this point. So I'm guessing the top pitchers are probably gone at this point. Actually, Skaggs and Ramos are still around. So going to have some interesting decisions to make with these back-to-back picks that we have at the end of the second round, thanks to the supplemental pick for Jackson Ferris. And we're going to go with position players here in the second round with our back-to-back picks. Juan Ramos, just don't see enough upside with him. Looks like he could have a versatile arsenal, but don't think that his stuff is going to be particularly special. If he's around in the third round, still would certainly consider him, but seems, compared to some of the other guys, a bit of a reach despite his really good personality traits. And then Ben Skaggs is fragile, looking for massive money, impossible to sign. His stuff is certainly more impressive, potentially at the high end, and potentially his outstanding control, some good personality traits as well. But don't feel like this is a year where we might have 10, 12, 15, 16 extra $1 million to chase after someone who's impossible to sign. So we're going to go with some surer things here in the second round. Tough decision for me between Allred, who's got the most power of anyone in this crew, and also, even though he's listed as a third baseman, has better range than the guys who are listed at second baseman, which is odd. Bramblett, like the speed, like the bunting ability, a decent bat with an average eye. Don't love the glove, do love the high work ethic. And then West arguably has the worst glove of the crew and the lowest speed, but potentially the best bat that could be above average at everything. And he also brings that durability to the fold as well. Scouting director recommends going with the infielder Steve Colgan, another guy who's a 4.5-star prospect that we talked about in the last episode. Doesn't look, honestly, all that different from some of these other guys, but I tend to agree with the worldwide scouting department that I prefer some of the other profiles a bit more. Colgan with that brutal arm, albeit something that could be improved and not critically important at second base. With our first of the back-to-back picks, we are going to go with John West, second baseman. Pretty interesting bat. Hopefully we can work on his defense. And similarly, in the second round, or with our second round pick, they're actually recommending Blink Ramos for us right now. As I mentioned, we're going to hold off on him. We're going to go with Bramblett. He was the second most popular of the players according to the worldwide scouting department, behind Wright. Really the only reason I waited to take him in this spot is this was here he was projected to go in the draft. So that's why I took West with the first second round pick, and now Bramblett with the second round pick. So definitely feel that we've brought on some pretty interesting offensive prospects with our first 3 picks of this draft. And as we get ready for our third round pick, Chad Allred, Coach 1549's choice, is still around. Would certainly be a good value pick. Was hoping that the pitcher Ramos may have stuck around. Unfortunately, he is off the board. Skaggs, the impossible to sign fragile player, is still around. Like I said, I don't think we really have the money to bring him on board this year. But if he continues to drop at some point, you take a flyer. At least I do. And I'm not in love with any of the pitchers who are available now. Not really in love with any of the position players that we haven't talked about in more detail. So we're going to pick up Allred here in the third round. Scouting director recommends that we go with the center fielder, Mitch Ponder. That low contact, I know, bothered some of the worldwide scouting department. Also, I'm not incredibly excited about it either. Looks like he's going to strike out a ton. If he's still somehow lingering in the fourth round, he could be our choice. But we're going to bring Allred on board, draft him, and not a bad situation, all things considered. There were 5 players that were highlighted as potential top picks by the worldwide scouting department, and we ended up with 4 of the 5 between our first round pick, our 2 second rounders, and our third round pick. As we move on to the fourth, Ponder, of course, is off the board, but hopefully we can find someone interesting to join our organization. And here in the fourth round, Scout recommends a reliever, Tim Day. Outstanding potential stuff, incredible potential stuff. 19-year-old, already throws in the high 90s. But his movement and control both look like they could be well below average. Also has faced a poor level of competition at Hudson Valley Community College in New York. Don't think that he's the right decision for us right now. We're going to keep going with offensive players. Kevin Stanaway has got the highest potential of anyone on the board. High work ethic, high intelligence, decent speed, and potentially outstanding home run power. I think he's a pretty interesting choice for the fourth round pick. I'm sure his home run power is what's gotten him the nickname of Goliath, because it's probably not his 150-pound frame, unless they're calling him Goliath to be ironic. Unfortunately, both Allred and Stanaway looking for way more than slot. They are the 2 most demanding players of the 5 that we've picked so far, even though there are third and fourth round draft choices. So probably not going to make offers to either of them imminently until we kind of get through the rest of the draft, and more importantly, get through the next few weeks till we get to the trade deadline. I don't necessarily think there's a ton that we're going to be doing with this team as we approach the trade deadline. As I talked about in the last episode, we've got our starting pitcher, the youngster Mike Blumenshine, starting a rehab assignment. Starting catcher Jorge Mendoza a few weeks away, and starting center fielder, the franchise Jake Ortega, about 3 weeks away at this point. So we've got a lot of reinforcements coming for the roster. Certainly we'll keep an eye on the trade market, but my hope is that the potential additions to the team of Ortega, Mendoza, and Blumenshine over the next month or so give us an opportunity where we may not have to be incredibly aggressive in the trade market this year. But if we do end up making some trades, that'll certainly change our financial situation a little bit, and maybe we'll end up picking some money that'll make it a little more palatable for us to overpay some of those recent draft picks relative to what we should be paying them based on their slot. And here in the fifth round, we're going to go with the biggest, highest ceiling once again. Not what our scout recommends. He recommends going with Bobby Jurison, starting pitching prospect out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Not a horrible prospect. Don't love the lack of movement on his pitches, but that's something that can be improved, like just about anything in the game. Do like his stuff and his potential 5-pitch arsenal. Actually, I'm getting a little more intrigued by him as I'm talking through him here. The alternative would be Ben Prince, a center fielder. Like our first-round pick, Mr. Wright, looks like he could be a very good defensive outfielder. A solid, but not necessarily incredibly looking bat. And decent speed, not a great bunter, given that we have gone so heavily with our first 5 picks all being position players. Again, I don't necessarily think in baseball particularly that drafting to fill a need makes a ton of sense unless you are picking a college player who you can really see potentially helping your lineup within the next 12, 18, 24 months. But I'd say at this point, after 5 consecutive position players, Ty perhaps would go to the pitcher. And after reviewing the options, we actually are going to follow our scout's advice and go with Bobby Jurisin for a 5th-round pick, the potential to have outstanding stuff, and maybe a 4, if not 5-pitch arsenal when all is said and done. Makes me think it's a gamble worth taking, particularly given that we've already got 5 position players picked. Don't love that he's fragile. Don't love that he's not that great at holding on runners. But he does have a high work ethic. Obviously, we've touched on the fact that we don't like the lack of movement on the pitches. Hopefully that is something we might be able to improve. Certainly not a perfect prospect, but potentially high-end stuff is always intriguing. And we are going to go ahead and draft Mr. Jurisin here in the 5th round. I believe that was the 5th. Yeah, I think we're on the 6th now. Yep, I'm not going crazy. Well, maybe I am already crazy. And Prince is still available in the 6th round. He's going to be awful tough for me to let go by now. Scouting director recommends Jerry Stevenson. He's a starting pitching prospect that we have been looking at. Another guy with a potential 5-pitch arsenal, more realistically probably a 3-pitch arsenal. But pretty average ratings overall. I like the high stuff potential pitcher we picked with Jurisin better than Stevenson. And Prince here to me, even though he's going to be looking for more than we should be paying for a 6th round pick, with the fact that he's not looking for slot, is still pretty interesting value to me as a 6th round selection. And the positive thing was that Jurisin was really not looking for much money at all. We knew it would be easy to sign him. And we've also made an offer to Prince. The more significant money that would be involved in Allred or Stanaway, as I noted, is something that we're going to monitor over the next few weeks. Potentially those guys could miss out on 2-3 weeks of action in their introduction to professional baseball and rookie ball if we wait to sign them a little bit, but feel like knowing what our financial situation really looks like is the right decision here. If we end up making a trade where we bring back, $6-7 million in cash somehow, which certainly is not implausible, that could make it much simpler for us to end up going after one or both of those players. And here in the 7th round, Tim Day, the JUCO relief pitcher with the insane stuff, is still on the board. I think if he's around in the 8th, we will take a flyer on him. But right now, we are going to go with Jerry Stevenson, who we talked about not too long ago. Not a brilliant prospect, but if he reaches his full potential, he's a useful back end of the rotation pitcher. And it's not impossible that we'll get some positive talent change randomness in some of these guys that we're drafting. And if Stevenson ends up being a guy that gets a little bit lucky and perhaps has a higher ceiling than we think, could end up coming a useful starter for us down the line. So we'll go with Stevenson in the 7th round. Moving on to the 8th, Tim Day is still around. I think this is a good spot to take a flyer on him. Clearly a fly ball pitcher with poor movement on his pitches and a inability to keep the ball in the ballpark, who also is going to be walking in potentially insane amount of players without a lot of stamina, who's bad at holding on runners, is not a great combination. But you can't teach the kind of stuff that we think he could have. Does have high work ethic. You never know what can happen with someone like him to get him in your system. So we are going to go with Tim Day here in the 8th round. And if we do anything interesting over the final 12 rounds of the draft, I'll be sure to let you know. And in the 9th round, we're actually going to go with the best player on the board, not our scouts recommendation, but Chase Nineheads Baldy is not a bad-looking prospect. Another guy who's actually looking for cash at this point in the draft, so we're going to have to spend some money on him to bring him on board, but a potentially interesting contact bat with a decent infield glove, and 9 heads for a 9th-round pick to me is an interesting guy to bring into the organization. And as I think about things a little more post the draft, I think I'm inclined to make offers to some of those good players that we got in the 3rd and 4th rounds now. I mentioned we're not going to likely be doing a ton as we approach the trade deadline. And we've got a fair amount of money available. You may remember from some of the trades that we made this past off season, we got a decent amount of money back in some of them. Not huge amounts, but enough that's meaningful for our Oakland A's. The negative of perhaps making offers to 1 or 2 of those guys now is that it'll limit our flexibility a little bit as we get closer to the trade deadline. Also increases the likelihood that we'll lose money this year because although that money that we picked up in trade gives us money that's available to spend, the money that we do end up spending on the draft budget is going to go against us. But my theory is, more often than not, when we've won the World Series, cheap old John Fisher hasn't boosted our budget, as happened again this year, when it'll be at $190 million next year. Despite making him a ton of money last year, you can see we had about $25 million in profit, or at least difference between revenue and expenses for him last year, and also won the World Series. And he did not increase our budget. So if he's going to be upset that we don't make some money this year, he hasn't really given me any incentive in terms of the budget that he's provided us over the years to go out and be particularly focused on delivering him profitability. And we're just going to try to learn something here. Typically, it doesn't seem like players sign for significantly less than their demands, but we're going to offer $1.5 million to Allred, $2.5 million to Stanaway, just kind of test our hypothesis, admittedly very lightly with how low these offers are, that you're generally not going to get these guys for significantly less than they're asking for. The benefit about making the offer to Allred, the 3rd round pick, is that if we don't end up signing him, and we should be able to come back after he likely refuses this offer, but we had to offer him at least $300,000 to guarantee that we'd get a compensatory pick if we don't sign him. So we should be all set to at least get a compensatory pick next year for Allred if we don't end up signing him this year. And with the draft now in the books, we've got a week of baseball till the All-Star break. We've been playing really well here in the month of July, 3 at home against Houston and then on the road at San Francisco, which isn't too far from being home for us before we get to the All-Star break. And we ended up having a great week after the draft, a 5-1 record for the week, won 2 out of 3 at home against Houston, and then we swept the Giants in the Bay Area series. So we've closed the gap on Texas to just 2 games as we head into the 2039 All-Star break, 2 games behind the Rangers in the division. 8-2 record in our last 10, and we are now 6 games up on the final wild card spot. Taking a look at the leaderboard, it has been a bit sparse for our A's this year, and that continues. Those of you who have followed us over the years, Steve Genius of the Rangers leading the league in ERA, leading the league in wins, leading the league in strikeouts, and of course also leading the league in pitcher WAR, as he tries to win a 6th consecutive American League Cy Young Award. The 29-year-old right-hander making $58 million this year for the Texas Rangers. And one small negative for us as we head into the All-Star break, Sergio Palomares is going to be out with a foot contusion for 1 to 2 weeks. He's been our everyday center fielder this year since Ortega got hurt. Batting only .230 this year, does have 21 doubles and 352 at-bats, and has scored 62 runs, stolen 24 bases as well. But the overall product is only a 92 WRC+. That said, he still has put up a 2.2 WAR, largely driven by his defense and his speed. So we're definitely going to be a little lacking in terms of strength in the middle of the outfield for the next few weeks, with Ortega already on the IL and now Palomares likely to join him there. But before we finish up the episode, we'll take a look at both the minor league all-stars from the A's organization as well as the major league all-stars. Minor league all-stars, a lot of young Oakland pitchers on the staff, including a couple in AAA. Federico Areola, 7-7 with a 5.50 ERA for Las Vegas this year, but the 22-year-old is listed as the number 75 prospect in baseball. Certainly looking at his skill set, you would think he would be performing better than he has in AAA. That being said, he's put up a 3.6 WAR, and his SIERA is about 2.5 runs per 9 innings less than his actual ERA. So has been pitching in terms of some of the supplemental and secondary metrics better than his top-line numbers. Ernesto Comunez, IAFA signing from 2035, 8-1 with a 3.25 in his introduction to AAA this year at only 21 years of age. Could definitely see Comunez being a big part of our pitching staff not too far from now. Lower in the organization, Joe Heilman, 5th-round pick from 2037, has 20 saves and a 3.31 ERA, made the jump to A-ball this year as a 20-year-old. And last but not least, Wilson Rangel, a IAFA signing from 2035, has 13 saves and a 1.38 ERA for us in Double-A. Another guy who looks like he could be a pretty big left-handed arm out of our bullpen in the not-too-distant future. Our outstanding young catcher, Jonah Richards, now listed as the number 12 prospect in baseball, guy we picked up in a trade with the Dodgers organization several years ago. Didn't necessarily look like a top-end prospect when we picked him up, but he certainly seems to be developing in one. Hitting .373 in his first 67 at-bats in Double-A ball with 8 homers, 17 ribbies, and a ridiculous 251 WRC+. Would think that we would see the Montville, New Jersey native up in AAA in the not-too-distant future. And that does it for the Oakland A's as far as minor league all-stars, at least minor league all-stars playing in the prospects game this year. 4 pitchers and a catcher. So presumably we'll have Oakland Battery at some point during this game, perhaps at multiple points in this game. And before we take a look at however many Major League All-Stars we're going to have this year, take a look at our team closing in on 100 games into the season with the All-Star game around the corner. The 57-40 record is actually 3 worse than expectations. We have been 29-12 since the beginning of June after that 500 start over the first couple months of the season. The offense is now the best in the American League, and we are in the top 6 in every offensive category in the AL, leading the league in on-base percentage, OPS, WAR, WOBA, runs scored, and walks. Pretty good team on the base paths, pretty solid team defensively, and we are 3rd in the American League in runs allowed, rank in the top half of the league in every category except home runs allowed, where we are right in the middle. And when all was said and done, those performances have added up to 4 All-Stars for our Oakland A's this year. Our outstanding young closer, Chuck Huntley, makes his first All-Star appearance this year after winning the Mariano Rivera Award and a World Series a year ago. 21 saves with a 1.36 ERA through his first 33 games and 33 innings pitched of the year. Has not allowed a single home run, and he struck out 46 on his way to a 2.1 WAR. Our catcher, Jorge Mendoza, despite being on the IL, named an All-Star as well, hitting .256 with 8 homers, 32 ribbies, and a 123 WRC plus before he went on the IL just about a month ago. Perennial All-Star at this point, our shortstop, Alejandro Landin, batting .291 with 24 homers, 67 ribbies, a 147 WRC plus, and a 3.6 WAR. The IAFA signing from over 12 years ago has become one of the top infielders in baseball for us. And last but not least, our 4th All-Star, another former IAFA signing from 2030 in this case, Arturo Uresti makes the All-Star team for the 2nd time in his career, batting just .243, but does have 20 homers and 55 ribbies at the All-Star break, putting up a 2.6 WAR for the defending World Series champion, Oakland Athletics. And as we get ready for the All-Star game and then the last 2 weeks before the trade deadline, as I mentioned, Mendoza and Ortega not too far away at this point. Should have some interesting decisions to make over the near term when we need to replace Sergio Palomares. We do have some young outfielders in AAA, so although we're going to probably lose a little bit defensively, it will be nice to see what somebody can do over the next few weeks. One of the guys we brought up this year continues to absolutely rake. Juan Pimentel, hitting .388 now in his first 170 Major League at-bats, with a ridiculous 18 doubles to go with 2 triples, 6 homers, 183 WRC plus, and a 2.4 WAR. When we brought him up, demoting Amare Alcindor at the beginning of June, that is when this team really began firing on all cylinders, and certainly the .388 average that the youngster Pimentel has put up for us has been a big part of moving this team in the right direction over the last month and a half. So would love to know what you think of what we did in the draft. Would love to know whether you think we should do much of anything as we approach the trade deadline. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.